Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Welcome to Class Act Coaching. I am Ashley Shaw, your host, and here with me is Daniel Rock. As always, he's going to help me pick out an incredible coach to walk me through yet another one of my issues. Welcome back, Dan.
When you say issues, are you talking about personal, social, romantic? Because I've got people for everything.
I mean, I have all those issues, but, I'm just going to focus on teaching, I think, right here. I don't think anybody wants to hear about any of my personal issues.
Now,
that's a different podcast.
That's just not true, but let's stick to teaching right now.
All right. You want to know what I'm thinking about this week?
Desperately.
Okay. So I really, really want my students to realize that we're not just doing busy work in class. The things that we're learning are actually relevant to their lives. I try to make everything I do relevant to their lives, but sometimes it's hard to convince them of that. So what I'm looking for this week is advice on how to make some of my assignments more authentic to real-world situations. You got a coach for that?
I do. What you're talking about is how do I connect what students are learning to the real world so that they can answer the question, why do I need to learn this? Why does this matter? How does this apply? And that can be challenging in some of our courses. We have a person at our SREB who's the director of PBL, and her name is Leslie Eaves. And she's
Wait, PBL being project-based learning for
project-based learning.
Okay, thank you.
Leslie Eaves, director of project-based learning, and she has a dynamic set of experiences going back to business and coming into education later on, but doing such an amazing job making learning relevant that she's been showing teachers how to do that across the country in all kinds of different places and in all kinds of different contexts. So she will definitely be able to give you some fantastic and practical ideas.
All right. Well, I am looking forward to working with her then. So I will see you in a little bit.
And we'll come back and we'll think about what are some of the coaching moves she uses and what that looks like.
Okay. Well, I will talk to you later, and let's bring in Leslie. Hi, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Ashley. How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I'm great as well. I'm loving the cooler fall weather here in North Carolina. I hope it'll last, but we will see.
Yeah, fall is my favorite time of year. So I want to start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're the one that we want to go to for our authenticity concerns.
So I'm Leslie Eaves. I am the PBL Project-Based Learning Program Director at SREB. I am an engineer turned educator. So I started my career as a chemical engineer and fell into education through an NSF grant where I was working in elementary school classrooms to connect elementary standards, science standards, math standards to engineering concepts, and fell in love with it. I loved working with kids. I loved working with teachers, and decided to take a sort of right turn in my journey. And I became a high school engineering teacher. Did that in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and then Winston-Salem for roughly 10 years. And then I transitioned into instructional coaching. So I've been doing that for the last 12, 13 years. I don't want to think about that math too hard. And I work with teachers across the country on how we can make teaching and learning more meaningful for students. So whether that be project-based learning or motivating, engaging instructional strategies or what have you, that is one of my passions.
That is great. And I want to say, just for the people out there that don't know, you said an acronym at the very beginning. You said PBL at the beginning.
Yep.
That is project-based learning, correct?
Correct. Project-based learning.
Can you just talk a little bit about what you mean by PBL?
Yes. Yeah. Project-based learning at its core is designing a meaningful, engaging learning experience where students not only master significant content and skills, but they tackle solving an overarching problem. Right. So, and we use that problem through solving that problem, they engage in learning the content. To me, in my classroom, it was when I first learned about it, it transitioned the culture of my classroom. It allowed my students to feel empowered where they had never felt empowered before. It allowed them to take ownership of the learning, where it truly became sort of the kids I would say running the classroom, the kids really doing the bulk of the work. And I was there guiding and facilitating and connecting knowledge where it could. It is hard for me to describe just how exciting it was to see students who maybe originally were kind of apathetic to learning and certainly learning about engineering, because all of our kids in the School of Engineering took the engineering program. So it was a forced elective. And then see them get excited and see them, hey, I can actually do this stuff. I never thought I could do this. And yet here I am doing it, right? I'm doing the job of an engineer in high school. And it doesn't have to be engineering. That was my experience. But I've also helped English teachers, social studies teachers, science teachers, math teachers bring the outside world into their classroom and empower their students to solve problems and not just learn content or not just be able to spit out content on a test, but really feel like it became part of who they are, right? It became connected in their brains and became part of who they are beyond high school.
I definitely hope one day you'll come back and we can do a whole episode on creating an actual PBL project.
Sure.
All right. I was talking to Dan and I told him that, like a lot of teachers, one thing that I always am working towards in my classroom is not just doing an assignment to do the assignment, but making sure they understand why we're doing the assignment and trying to figure out ways to make it authentic to them so that hopefully they see we're not just learning this to pass the time. Maybe they're more engaged with it if they understand, hey, these are real things that I might be doing in my life or I might see somewhere in the real world. So that's always a concern for me. And I'm sure it is for a lot of people listening right now. And that's why I wanted you to come today and talk to us about that. Do you have any advice for me on bringing some authenticity to my classroom?
We can engage in some of these practices before we even try a PBL. And we can try to up the authenticity. We can increase that connection to real world even before we do a really PBL. So we can kind of petite step into some of these and try them out before we, actually engage in a big project.
Okay, good. Perfect.
I mean, certainly one of the things when we think about authenticity, we want to make the connections for students between what they're learning and where they're going to use it out in the world. That's one way to look at authenticity. Another way that when you were talking, you hit on something like it being meaningful for students. And so another way we can connect authenticity is also connecting the curiosity, the passions, the interest of our students into the content. So we can go either way. So is there a lesson or is there something that you're working on that you want kids to connect more with the content? Like, what do you want kids to get out of it?
Yeah. So one thing that I like to do is I teach composition. So it's writing a lot of essays. And I don't want them to just think of like, oh, an essay. You're never going to write an essay again outside of school. So I try my best each semester to find different, what I'm going to call real world ways that they might use the same concepts in that essay. For example, instead of just an argumentative essay, they write a campaign speech as if they're running for office, convincing people why to vote for them. So I'm always looking for things like that. But what I find sometimes is, yes, it's technically real world, but might not necessarily, like, if they're not trying to ever run for office, then they still don't care. So I want to figure out ways to not only do what I'm saying, where I have these papers that they're writing or whatever the assignment is, that are things that happen in the real world, but that make it relatable to them specifically.
Right. Well, I want to, before we get started, I want to definitely validate something that I heard you just say that you already do. And so one of the first steps when I work with teachers is to, all right, where does this content fit in the real world? So you were talking about essays or nonfiction writing. So you went through and you looked at where would kids write some type of nonfiction or argumentative thing. And one of them was campaign speeches. And we can make a list of all different ones that you did. That's a great first step. And I want to make sure I honor and validate that because, sometimes we just think, oh, we're going to do an essay about this and we're in our teacher brain and we need to get a little bit out of our teacher brain. So kudos.
Thank you.
So the next thing, the question that I'm hearing from you is, well, how do I incorporate my students' passions a little bit more, right? What they're interested in.
Yes.
So,
very much so.
yeah. So you tell me, what are your kids interested in?
That's a hard question for me to answer because it's so varied because they're unique people. Yep. Obviously, they all have their say, some of them are sports and some of them are artists and some of them are very much business people. And some of them are like, you can't tell what they're interested in because they are the academic. I'm in class to be in class and to learn, and let's not do all these fun activities. We're here to take note. So there's such a wide range, which I do think makes it a little bit harder because unless I just give them all complete freedom to just design their own project, it's hard to find something that fits such a diverse group of students.
Yeah. So my brain is spinning because there are different directions that we could take that. So one is I like the idea. I actually kind of like the idea of students proposing their own question and guiding them through that. And then the essay becomes sort of the thing at the end that they do to answer their question. And they can take it and run with it, or providing students certain choices of how they want to practice it. So if the core route is writing, let's say argumentative. So you talked about an argumentative essay. I'm thinking about, is there a way for students to first start by reading some argumentative essays in a variety of different capacities and fields, and they pick the one that they want, and then they're exploring or noticing what does it mean to be argumentative, but we're giving them a text, we're giving them some options for text that they can go through that may resonate with them. So if you have kind of more of the science nerd like me, maybe you have a science piece that they can explore. If you have more of your sports fans out there, maybe there's something in there. And then they can use that as they're learning about argumentative essays, and then they apply it to whatever type of essay that you want. So that's one way of kind of bringing in students' passions. Another way is take a poll. You can also offer up different suggestions for, all right, my big thing is I want you guys to write an argumentative essay. Here are some topics of where you might see this in the real world. And, I'm going to guide you on the planning process, but you can pick which direction you go.
Okay, so I have a question about that because I have done kind of what you said, a little bit of a few things that you just said. So I give them the option of the campaign speech, but it's like they have a choice between A, B, and C, basically. A is the campaign speech. B is you invented something, write a letter asking investors for funding for why they should, invest in your project. And then C is design your own project and get it approved by me, and you can write something that interests you. And I thought when I made that would be kind of what you're saying. That's like the idea that, they're going to have their passion. But what I find is I think maybe over the years that I've done that, 3 students have done the design their own project. Everybody else is just like, I'm just getting this assignment out of the way.
So just to clarify, you may only have 1 or 2 students that actually propose to do something different. And in the end, a lot of students are just sort of like, I just need to get this done. I need a credit.
Exactly.
Quit bothering me.
They don't even think about their paper till the last minute. So they're not, by that point, they don't have time to get something approved and write up a thing. So they just, do one of the ones I picked, even though it might not be of interest to them. And by the way, the ones that actually do pick their own topic are usually the ones that are the best. Whether that's because they started early and they're the students that actually thought about it, or whether it's just because they're actually interested in it, I can't say for sure. But I would love to move more towards that.
And it is fine. I would say, again, great starting point. The fact that you opened it up, had kids propose their own, and even if it was just a handful of them, you got a little bit more students to engage where they may not have engaged as deeply if it wasn't something of interest. So let's give credit where it's due. Now, how do we take it to the next level? How do we get the other kids interested in it? So there are two pathways in my brain that I'm thinking you could go in. One is finding a intriguing enough issue or problem that students naturally will be like, that have like deep opinions about, but they may not necessarily be knowledgeable opinions about. I mean, it could be anywhere from like climate change to should pineapple belong on pizza, if you want to be kind of funny about it. Deep, issues where they're like, oh, they already come with opinions and they want to divulge their opinion. The trick here, though, is that you're now going to ask them, your opinion just can't be your opinion. It has to come with data and you have to do the research. So you could start with a intriguing issue or problem or question that the students have to then dive into that's of natural interest. And it could be from silly, like the pineapple, like does pineapple belong on pizza? I bet you if you throw that out to your students at your next thing, you're going to get a lot of responses that you wouldn't even imagine were controversial responses to something more contentious. And you throw that out there and see where they are. The key is you want to spark them early. So you can always start with that intriguing question or that intriguing issue that naturally they're going to want to kind of dive into. I like to also, when I'm doing that, use what we call in PBL of like exciting launches. So an intriguing video that sets it up. For example, I'm thinking about one of the projects that I wrote as I was working with adults and to try and get adults to think a little bit outside their box on an issue was with the question, is access to water a human right? And that was it. And we started with a video from National Geographic's Burden of Thirst article series. Now, this is dated, like, I think that was like 2014, 15. But it was 2 minutes of like this photographer saying, and these pictures that she's taken of women just like walking to these wells and walking thousands of miles and doing that. And then every time it would just be silent. And then you introduce the question, is access to water a human right? Is access to clean water a human right? And just that video coupled with that question, it sounds like an yes or no question, but it's not an easy yes or no question. It's meant to evoke an emotion. It's meant to evoke an experience. And then we hooked them. We can hook them. We can get them. Now they're going to want to dive in. Now they're going to want to debate and argue and kind of form an opinion. What are you thinking about that idea?
I love that. I've tried to do similar things in the past where I give them internet debates to do, but I have them do it on their own. It's like homework. What I think I hear you saying, which I think is a great idea, is not to have it be the homework, have it be that class activity where they're engaging together. So instead of it just being, hey, for homework, write a little bit about does pineapple belong on pizza, but actually have them together in class so that you have the essence of, no, it's an actual debate. And so that is definitely something that I'm like, oh, I don't have class time to do that. That's a homework assignment. They'll do that outside of class. But I think I'm wrong with that. And I think that you're right. And that's a great idea.
Yes, because just thinking about the PBL practices, one practice on foster a classroom environment that supports student learning and ownership of student learning. The way that we do that is in our classrooms, we provide connecting experiences that bring the class together as a community. The more that the students feel like their voice is heard and shared, not only and respected by the teacher, but also by their fellow students, they will connect into the work. Like the work will feel meaningful to them. And when we can also pair that with a sort of intriguing, connected experience in the classroom. Now we're starting to provide meaning for the students. It becomes a little bit more authentic because it's something that they're doing together.
And at least in my class, I know I can figure out a way to build that into more classes than one, I think, because if it's a question at the beginning of the semester that we're kind of working on together all semester, when we're learning research and they have to find sources to back it up, but then when we actually get into argumentation and they actually do the debate in class, but they already have their sources because they've been researching at the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I
and
think
you
that's
start
great.
with the debate. So what's interesting is you could start with that initial debate, then guide them through the research process and the data collection and them writing their essays, but then not just the essay, but then end with the debate. Did anybody change?
Or even if they didn't change their actual opinion, how much better are they arguing it?
Exactly. Yeah, you could even do like, okay, in this first debate, I tracked the number of times people cited evidence, from somewhere, and then here, and it was maybe 3 times. We were just focusing on opinion. Now I'm going to have you guys debate or have a whole group discussion, and I'm going to track how many times you cited evidence for that. And, we just compare and then have the kids, and you can have kids doing that reflection, of, okay, well, how did we grow? What was the difference? Right. And then you're having them reflect on their learning and reflect on then you're providing like bookend experiences where they can compare and contrast who they were at the beginning of the unit and who they are at the end of the unit.
I love that idea. I'm definitely going to use it at some point. So thank you.
Yeah. Let me throw another idea out at you as well in that process. So when it's possible, community partners are a way that we can put the bow on a learning experience. And I want to be very clear. I do not think that everything has to involve an outside person coming in. However, when you do, students perk up. It used to drive me crazy. As an engineer, I knew what my kids needed to do, needed to study, but I was teacher. I was Mrs. Eaves. I wasn't engineer Mrs. Eaves. When I would bring in an engineer to work with the students, talk to the students, share their experience with the students perked up. They listened more to that expert coming in because it was something different. It was something novel. They could, it rang truer for them, right? It rang more authentic because it was somebody coming in from the outside community. And in some cases, it was also a professional in the outside community that took the time to come and speak to them. And when you have kids who feel disempowered by the community, having the community come into your classroom is almost a way of saying, we care about your education. We care about what you're doing. And I am providing my time in there. Students may not be able to necessarily say that in words. And if you're working with teenagers like I did, they play it off really cool. But when an engineer comes in and talks with them and then also says, hey, you guys had some really great questions, they start to puff up. They're like, yeah, we did. Yeah, they had their engineering notebooks out. Like they were students they almost didn't recognize, right? So if there's ways that we can bring in outside people that help to cement the learning experience. So this could be bringing in, as part of the research process, as part of the learning process, somebody for students to interview. So that helps them define what their opinion, what their direction as part of their research is, to interview somebody. We can't always trust that kids can do that on their own. So again, you bring it into the classroom, you provide that experience in the classroom connected together that can help them hone their questioning skills, their interview skills, their curiosity, but they're also learning from somebody in the process. So if it's that silly pineapple on pizza question, it could be bringing in a pizza chef and hearing their story about what pizza means to them. My late husband loved pizza. He managed pizza restaurants. He would be one that could really pontificate about pizza in the classroom. So really, it seems like a silly one, but you could do that, or you could, and maybe you have 2 different chefs who think about it 2 different ways and bring that in. If it's the more serious one about access to clean water, or, what's the deal with climate change, maybe you can connect in with local aid efforts or local scientists in the community that can come in and be that, hey, this is what I'm doing in the field and this is what I'm thinking. Like, I can bring to you what's actually happening in this work in the classroom, and the kids can interview them. The big thing is to make sure, if you're doing that experience, that it's not just a expert coming in and sharing and lecturing to the students about their work, but there is, before they come in, students prepare questions. And so you may have a lesson just on preparing for interview questions and how do we ask the right questions. And then you have the expert there so that the students are asking questions and there's give and take. And then the next lesson afterwards, you have some type of activity that helps kids to summarize what they learned and apply it into their work. So you have to make sure that it's meaningful.
First of all, I love that. And I have tried something similar in my classes where I have this is how you ask interview questions, and then they go out and find somebody to interview. And one thing you said that really connects with my experience, I guess, is that if they're going out, they're not necessarily knowing how to find people, which is they end up interviewing their mom or their dad or a sibling or their friend or something, whatever. And it's because, well, first of all, it's easy and they just are going to find somebody easy instead of going and looking for somebody. But also, I'm sure because they don't know how to find people to interview. And I'm going to be honest, that's my problem too. I don't necessarily, other than if I just happen to have a friend who's a chef, I don't know how to go find a chef to come to my classroom. I like the idea of bringing them in for that reason of it's going to be better interviews than if I let them pick their own people. Do you have tips for all of us teachers out here that are like, oh, well, I like that idea, but how do I find them?
Yeah. Well, and first I want to address, when you brought up something that is near and dear to my heart, and that is making sure that we're providing learning experience where every student can access the experience. And not every student have connections beyond immediate family. So, we need to, I think about universal design. And when we're designing learning experiences, taking the principles of universal design, where we're making sure that every student can access it at a high level. And so whenever we take it out of our classroom, we lose the control. Whenever we take it outside the classroom, we lose control over what resources students have available to them. So the more that we can bring it into the classroom, we can control what they're being exposed to and how we're helping them to be developed into, the person that they need to be. So one thing is, and this is from, I don't know if you're shy, I'm shy, but one thing is to check my shyness, and I have to do some internal work to make some cold calls. So it first starts with, I might put out on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, I'm looking for somebody who is an expert in this area. Does anybody have any connections? Go through your network. Generally, if we are professionals in the field, we have a social network. If you belong to a church, if you belong to any type of outside groups, it could be teachers in your community, it could be parents of your students, but work your social connections to see, is there somebody who has that connection? I also find universities. So if you have local higher ed institutions, community college, universities, whatever you want to call them, are there people doing research in this area that you can bring in? A lot of times they love to talk about the research, and they love to be able to bring that over and above universities, especially if it's a social issue or people like the access to clean water. There are probably people working on these problems. So are there nonprofit organizations that are out there that you might be able to write an email to or connect to? And I know it feels like we're taking on a lot of the hard work, and we are. However, I think it gets to, who do we want to be and who do we need to be so that our students can learn what they need to learn and really connect in with the experience. Because if I do the work, that's one person doing the work, and then I'm able to provide an experience so that in the classroom, the kids do the work. So my work is beforehand. So in the classroom, the students can really focus and they get a rich experience. If I then ask the kids outside to do it, then that's 20, 24, 25, 30 people having to do the same work that could take one person with a 2-hour window, or maybe even just some 5-minute emails or texts out here and there can actually bring somebody in. So I always just think, where are we going to spend our time? Where do I want my students spending their time? Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's really good. That's really useful information. And some of the things like going to your local university that I never would have thought of, but it's a great point. I know a lot of PhD students, and they absolutely do love to talk about research. They would 100% go to a class to talk about it.
And I'm always just surprised at who people know or what people, are involved with if we just ask.
Right. Well, I love that. Do you have any other ideas or tips?
I think the other thing to think about, and I don't know if it helps you with this problem, but in this idea of how do we make the learning feel authentic and real to students, right? So what we're talking about is bringing the outside world into the classroom, right? In it, bringing in people that do this work in the classroom to come in and be a part of the learning experience for students is one way that we can do that. Another way that I think is it's underrated, but it can elevate the learning experience in small ways, is bringing in authentic career roles, processes, or tools for students to engage in. So, for example, with the argumentative essay, one of the things that I have worked with English teachers on is providing, so I know several authors, let me just say that. Like I know people who write books, right, in different ways. Almost all of them belong to some type of writing workshop or writing group that gives them feedback. So I can use that in my classroom to say, hey, you guys have written these things. We're going to engage in a process that actual authors engage in, and we're going to do some writing workshops. And here's the protocol that we're going to do in order to do that. In my engineering classroom, we would bring in tools like Gantt charts. We did Gantt charts a lot in my classroom, which are a way of planning out projects, who's responsible, and setting up a timeline. What I wish I had known are things like an easier tool, such as a Scrum board, where students put up like, here are my to-dos. And then we, when during the day they plan and they say, okay, this is what I'm doing today. And then when it's done, they move it to the done column. That is an authentic tool used in industry. It's also a tool that I can use to help kids learn time management and project management. And it's a tool that I can use to track their progress on a project and provide in-time feedback. And because they're doing it, and I told kids, this is a real thing that real people use to manage their time, they engage with it a little bit more. If you're working on graphic design, instead of having kids do it on PowerPoint or on Publisher, which is used in the industry, see if you can get access to Canva. Or is there, are you in your area able to access the tool that graphic designers would use? Even if it's a free version of that tool, so students are engaging in using the tool that would be used in industry to do the thing that we're asking them to do.
So I've loved the ideas you've given me. I just want to do a quick little recap and talk about what I think are the 3 ideas you've given me today, just as a reminder for everybody. So the first one is kind of what I'm going to call a gateway question. Start with a gateway question, a debate topic. That's something that is going to interest them and get them talking, that you can use over a few courses. Then your second idea, bring in the community, bring in experts to talk to the class and show them and let them interview those experts. So the third one that I have here is bring the real world to them through the tools that you bring in, tools that might actually be used in careers or the assignments you give them, things like that. That bell means we are almost out of time, and it's time for you to give me some homework.
Sure. So what I would you and any educator to do is to think about what you want students to learn. What it, really not just like the standards on the page, but what does it look like and mean for students to really engage with that standard, with that learning? And where does that connect in the real world? Where do people use that knowledge? Are there tools that people use to engage in that knowledge? really, how can you make it real for the student? So then plan something, right? Plan something to try something and bring it into your classroom, even if it's just for one day.
I love that. And I will work on this. And everybody listening, feel free to do your own and share with us on social media. Leslie, I want to thank you so much for coming today. This has been very enjoyable. I've loved everything you've talked about, and I've loved the examples that you gave. And I can't wait for you to come back and do a full PBL lesson with me and teach me how to do a PBL unit in my class.
Thank you.
All right, Ashley, how did you feel about that coaching session?
I thought it went well. It is a lot of pressure, though, to have to start finding some community partners to bring into my classroom. You got to make
you
those
can do
calls.
it. Yeah, there's a million ways to find that. I thought I would talk briefly from the perspective of an instructional coach. She did some interesting things in that conversation that I just want to highlight. One thing that was fascinating was how she listened to what you were saying in a variety of different ways. She had a lot of great listening techniques. She validated what you said, right? She would repeat to you what you said. And when you were sort of questioning, she would help you think about, well, what are some positives you take away from what you've done in the past?
Yeah, I thought she
Did you notice her do that?
too. Yes, I did. She did a great job with that.
And did you also notice how she would always restate what you said back to you?
Yes, which I felt confident we were on the same page because of it. So I see why that would be useful.
It also helped her ensure that she was listening and that what she thought she heard was what she heard. And she also asked a lot of clarifying questions before she gave advice. She didn't just assume that she understood what you were saying or what you were coming from. She made sure that she had the details. And I think from that, she was able to give you some really targeted feedback on what you were trying to do.
Yes, I thought she did a great job with that.
Well, I look forward to seeing who you bring in and getting some of those authentic learning experiences.
All right. Well, thank you so much, as always, for your help. I can't wait to see who you have for me next week.
All right. See you then.
All right. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Class At Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.